Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 6 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. So this chapter is called The Defeat of the Minyae. So if you think back to what we've been talking about in the Hercules story, we read that he had come to Thebes and he was working for the king of Thebes named Creon, right? So Creon was not a very good king, you might say, right? He was kind of a weak king. And he's been forced to pay this tribute to this group of people called the Minyae, which are really warlike people. They're the neighbors of the Thebans. And so what ended up happening in the last chapter is when the envoys had come to talk about the tribute, Hercules basically killed them, right? He attacked them. And so that's why in the last chapter we had this idea of the cruel deed when Hercules cuts their ears off. It's really what he does. So now we have this chapter called The Defeat of the Minyae, and you're going to see the minions are going to respond by declaring war on Thebes. So we dive right in, picking up where we left off. You have Erginus, Rex Minyarum, ob haec vehementer errata statum cum omnibus copiis infines Thebanorum contendit. So we have a new character, right? Erginus, the king of the minions, right? The Rex Minyarum. So you have ob haec, on account of these things, right? Remember, haec here is a substantive adjective. So it's neuter, plural, and it's not describing any noun nearby. So since it's neuter, we described as things. And what we're talking about is because Hercules attacked the envoys, right? So since he attacked the envoys, you have vehementer. He sort of violently, you might say, or very much was angry, right? He was vehemently angry. And immediately, statum, he contended, he hastened, right? He quickly went, cum omnibus copiis, with all his troops. So here, copia, when you have it in the plural, it can mean supplies, but it also can mean troops, meaning like, men, right? Your soldiers. There's a kind of a couple different ways you see it in contexts like this, but in this specific one, you're talking about his troops. So he hustled or came with all his troops into the Fines, to the boundaries, the lands of the Thebans, right? So he showed up with his army in response to Hercules chopping off his messenger's ears. Then you have Creon adventum eis per exploratores cognovit. So Creon, the king, right, he cognovit, he kind of learned, right, learned of the arrival, or he knew about, you might say cognovit, the adventum, the arrival of him, meaning of King Erginus, right, of the minions, right? And he knew this per exploratores, through spies, is really what it's getting at here. So an explorator, it could be a scout even. Scout, spy, it kind of means the same thing. He has people out, in the countryside, and he's learned that the minions are showing up with an army. Okay. Then you have ipse tamen pugnare noluit, nam magno timore affectus erat. So he himself, ipse meaning King Creon, he himself, however, noluit pugnare, he didn't want to fight. So noluit just is from the verb nole, to not want. And you have the complementary infinitive of pugnare, right, to fight. So King Creon doesn't want to fight. He's kind of a cowardly king in the story, right? And he doesn't want to fight because nam, or for, affectus erat. So here we have a fourth principal part, right, affectus. And again, this is, this verb that kind of means like to be affected or influenced. It's the verb afficio, afficere. So we have a fourth principal part plus the verb to be. It's going to be passive voice, and it's either perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect tense. And the way you can tell is by the tense of the verb esse. So since we have erat here, which is the imperfect tense of esse, when you put it with a fourth principal part, you have the pluperfect passive voice. So you're saying, since he had been affected or had been influenced, right? And when you have that passive voice, you're looking for an ablative, usually an ablative of agent or means, to tell you like what influenced or impacted him. And it's magno timore. So he had been affected by great terror, right? Meaning he was very afraid. Okay. So he didn't want to fight because he's really afraid of the approaching minion army. Then you have Tebani, Igitor, Herculem Imperatorum Creavera. So therefore, Igitor, the Thebans, right, meaning the people, not the king, the Thebans Creavera, they created or made Hercules, Herculem, the Imperatorum, right? They made Hercules the commander, you might say, right? The leader, the general, however you want to translate that. But they made Hercules the general because their king is not doing anything, right? Is kind of the idea here. So again, since we had the pluperfect before, you can always kind of expect a perfect or an imperfect tense verb, which is what creaverant is here, right? So first, the king was afraid, and second, the people made Hercules their commander, right? So Hercules has been turned into like the general of the Theban army, is the idea. Then you have Ileuntios in omnes partes dimissit et copias coigit. So Ile, he, meaning Hercules, he demissit, he sent out, what did he send out? Nuntios, messengers, into all parts. And really it means all parts of Greece, right? So he sent sort of envoys or messengers out into all parts of Greece, right? And the reason he did it is listed here. He was coigit copias. He's collecting, right? Or literally he collected copias, supplies, troops, right? However you want to translate that. And again, coegi is the third principal part of kogere, which means to compel or collect, right? Kogo kogere in this case. So it's talking about Hercules sends out messengers, right? And the messenger's job is to get troops, food, supplies, however you want to translate that, basically to get ready for war is what's happening here, okay? Then you have tum proximo die, cum magno exercitu profectus est, right? So then you have the ablative of time when, proximo die, on the following day, right after he's done this, profectus est, it's still referring to Hercules, right? Profectus est is the deponent verb. It's perfect tense of proficiscor, which means to set out. So you can translate this as he set out, right? And he set out cum magno exercitu, with a large army. Okay, so after he sends out the messengers and he collects the troops, Hercules now has a large army, right? The magno exercitu, and he set out to face the incoming Minyae army. Okay, then you have locum idoneum delegit et acium instruxit. Okay, so delegit here, really means like to choose or to select. It's perfect tense. So you're saying he selected, right? A locum, a place, right? Idoneum means like a suitable place, right? Is kind of one way to translate it. An appropriate place, you might say. So he selected a suitable place and he instructs it, right? He kind of drew up, you might say, it kind of has the idea of like instructing something, but it's really more like drawing up or organizing, right? So he drew up his acies, his battle line, okay? So, it's saying that Hercules picked a spot, and you're going to see it's a hill, and he creates his acium, his line of battle, right? He organizes his troops is really what it is, okay? Then you have tum Tebani e superiore loco impetum in hostes fecerunt. So then the Thebans, the Tebani, right, the Thebans, they fecerunt, they made, right, it's the perfect tense of facio facere, and they made an impetum, they made an attack is literally what it means. A superiore loco means from the higher place, right? Superiore is superior, right? Higher or upper. And it's talking about being on a hill. So from that kind of higher ground, you might say, from the higher place, they made an attack in hostes, into the enemy, right? Meaning they charged down the hill into the Minyae army, okay? Then you have ille autem impetum sustinere non potuerunt, itaque acies hostium pulsa est, atque in fugam conversa. So you have ille, they, meaning the Thebans. So they, however, non potuerunt, they were not able, sustinere, to kind of sustain, you might say, or maybe endure is a better way to translate it. They weren't able to endure the impetum, the attack, meaning the minions are kind of overwhelmed by the Thebans charging down this hill. Then you have itaque, and so the acies, and it looks, this is a little tricky, acies, right, a battle line. It's a fifth declension noun, and that the nominative singular is acies. So if you're not sure that it might look like a third declension noun, maybe like nominative or accusative plural, it's not. It's actually nominative singular, and it's feminine, which is why it's going with pulsa here, right? So you're saying the acies, the battle line hostium of the enemy, right? It's plural, enemies, I guess, but we kind of singularize it, meaning of the army, enemy army. So the battle line pulsa est. Here we have that fourth principal part, right, plus the verb to be. So again, when you're looking at this, you always want to try to figure out like what tense is it. It's perfect tense passive voice. So the battle line was pushed back, right? Or was like repulsed is kind of the idea. It was pushed back or kind of hit into, and attaque or and so conversa in fugam. And here, conversa has to do with turning. So you can almost imply like it was kind of pushed into, pulsas driven back, and it was turned, right? Turned in fugam, in flight, right? So fugam is really like a retreat or a flight or something like that. So the idea is Hercules charges down the hill with the Theban army. He crashes into the army of the minions, and they're so overwhelmed by his attack that they run away. Okay, so this chapter again, or this section of the Hercules story, not particularly crazy in terms of the Latin or the grammar. It's all things that we've been seeing before, but it's starting to show a different side of Hercules, right? So far, he's kind of been this loner doing crazy things like cutting off ears and beating music teachers over the head to kill them. Now you're getting to see him in a different light as a military commander and as a leader, which is part of his sort of his character as well. He's not always just being crazy and running headlong into things and just beating people over the head. There are times where he shows leadership too, and that's what you're seeing here in this story, right? The Thebans need someone to lead their army because Creon isn't able to. He's afraid, and Hercules steps up, and because he is a warrior, he's able to drop a battle plan and actually lead the army to victory, right? Which is why we have this chapter called The Defeat of the Minions. So hopefully this made some sense. Again, like I always tell in these videos, you want to make sure that you have the vocab in a pretty good place. So study the vocab first, and if you can find someone you can read this story to and have them read it back to you, that process of reading and listening to the Latin is really important. You don't want to shut those two parts of your learning off. It'll help you kind of catch the patterns, and you'll probably catch on to here that Ritchie is repeating a lot of phrases, right? And so the more you kind of go through these stories, the more you're going to catch these repetition of vocab and phrases, and hopefully it'll be easier as you go. But if you have any questions at all in this section, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to help you out. But otherwise, just keep at it, and hopefully you're enjoying the Hercules story, and it's making some sense to you, and you're feeling more comfortable with the Latin as you go. Good luck.